Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for taking time out to talk.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. So I read a little bit that you weren't fully sold on doing a sequel to An Inconvenient Truth.
No.
What was the reasons behind that?
Well, I just had a lot of mixed feelings about it until I met Bonnie Cohen and John Chink, the directors, and just blown away by their talent, and they had a really clear vision for how they felt the movie should be made, and that persuaded me.
I mean, did you feel that you had given the message you wanted to give in the first one, and then it was a question of what more can I say, and then that you needed a little convincing to know what you needed to say more?
Well, it took me a bit to realize how big the changes have been in the last decade. Number one, the climate-related extreme weather events are way more frequent now and way more destructive. We've had 11 once-in-a-thousand-year events in the U.S. just in the last 7 years. Secondly, we've got the solutions now. And they were in the first movie a decade ago, but they were on the horizon, and you had to take the technology business point of view to say, oh yeah, that'll eventually get here. Now they're here.
Yeah.
And in so many places, electricity from solar and wind is cheaper than electricity from fossil fuels. And now the batteries are coming down in cost very quickly. So it's very exciting news that needed to be told.
But still, also, like you said, very scary events that happen.
Yeah.
I mean, we just the iceberg in Antarctica, the piece of it that collapsed that was the size of like Delaware or something. I mean, when you hear news like that, what do you think when you hear like that? I mean, is that a major issue when it comes to climate change?
Well, it's a major signal that the warming of Antarctica is moving even faster than was predicted.
And it's real. Like, it's hard to dispute that.
It's hard to dispute it, absolutely. It's one of the largest icebergs ever recorded. Now, it was already floating in the sea, so by itself it will not raise sea level. But it's part of a larger pattern in Antarctica that's very tightly connected to how much the seas will rise in the decades ahead.
And we're talking about sea level. I mean, one thing you show in the sequel is that one of the scenarios that you showed in the first movie, the flooding of Lower Manhattan, the damage to the 9/11 memorial, could happen, and actually did happen with Hurricane Sandy.
It happened many years before the scientists predicted that it would.
And then to kind of do a little modern day look, then you go to Miami and you see parts of Miami. You show that there are areas that are flooded. People are just driving through, walking through this shin and knee-high water.
On a sunny day.
Yeah.
Just because the sea level has risen
rain, right.
so much that when a high tide comes in, it floods the streets. I saw fish from the ocean swimming in the streets. Since then, somebody sent me a picture of an octopus in a parking garage there. That's something you don't see every day. But there are a lot of low-lying coastal cities that are now seriously threatened by sea level rise, which comes from the melting ice.
Yeah, and scientists are saying the same thing. A little story we ran not too long ago by David Wallace Wells for New York Magazine. I want to give you a quote he said here. Most people talk if Miami and Bangladesh still have a chance of surviving. Most of the scientists I spoke with assume we'll lose them within the century, even if we stop burning fossil fuel in the next decade. So when you hear a quote like that, and you see that President Trump has a cabinet that has many people that feel climate change is not a major issue, how does that make you feel?
Well, the truth about the climate crisis is still inconvenient for the large carbon polluters and the politicians who are in their pockets.
But are you disappointed that in some ways America is not a leader in climate change on the world stage?
Of course, but I would distinguish between Donald Trump and the United States of America. Even though he's president, he does not speak for the country on this issue. And that was vividly illustrated in the aftermath of his speech pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement. Almost immediately, not only did the rest of the world double down on its commitments, but also here in this country, governors, mayors, business leaders, they said, we're still in the Paris Agreement, and they're doubling down. A lot of cities have now made a decision to go 100% renewable energy. And the latest studies indicate the U.S. is almost certainly going to meet its commitments under the Paris Agreement, regardless of what Donald Trump says.
And recently, Trump has said that he might reconsider going back into the agreement. Do you feel that, that's a good thing? Does it even matter?
I'm not going to hold my breath. I had conversations with him after the election and during the first part of his presidency, trying to convince him to stay in the Paris Agreement. And I thought there was an excellent chance that he would come to his senses and stay in, but I was wrong about that. And I would take his statements to the French president that he might come back into the Paris Agreement with a grain of salt. But I hope I'm wrong again. I hope that actually he does reconsider, but I don't put much stock in it.
So you ramble off many stats of climate change. You know many of them. Is there one stat that scares you the most when it comes to climate change?
Well, there are a couple that go together, and this is a little geeky, so you asked for it.
Let's geek out.
The cumulative amount of man-made global warming pollution that's in the atmosphere now traps as much extra heat energy every day as would be released by 400,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every day. Wow. And it's a big planet, but that's an awful lot of energy. Now, the second statistic is we're still putting 110 million tons of that stuff into the air every single day, as if the sky's an open sewer. And all of the increased temperatures that people talk about, that's air temperature.
Right.
More than 90% of the extra heat energy is going into the oceans. And that's why Superstorm Sandy was so much more destructive. That's why the ice is melting more rapidly. That's why the water cycle is being disrupted, and we get a lot more water vapor coming from the oceans into the sky, and that's why we get these enormous downpours and big floods. Another one just yesterday. Yeah. They happen all the time. Now, every night on the TV news is like a nature hike through the book of Revelation.
You know, one thing that stood out for me with an Inconvenient Sequel is you touch on, for one moment, about personal failures in the evolution of you trying to bring climate change to all of our attention. Though off the Paris Agreement, it seems everybody's kind of rebounded to get back on. What was it initially for you, though, when you heard the news that Trump pulled out of the agreement? I mean, for you, was that up to that level of a personal failure that he did not?
Well, I worried a lot that other countries would follow his lead, but I was so gratified when the rest of the world said, no, we're not going to pay any attention to that. We're still in, and we're going to double down. And I was even more gratified when all of the domestic political and business leaders stepped up to the plate and said, well, we're going to fill the gap.
In a strange way, all the news with the Paris Agreement, did it give a heightened sense of just the climate change issue? I mean, there's more press talking about it now than, you know, Weather Channel changed their whole homepage, you know, to show the effects of climate change. I mean, you know, this movie was coming out regardless, so we were going to have this conversation, but I mean, it seems like, you know, a lot more people are talking about it now because of the actions he did.
Yeah, I think it's because, I think it's partly a reaction to Donald Trump. You know, in physics, there's the old law for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Sometimes that's true in politics. If somebody's out there making nonsensical statements but wielding power behind them, a lot of people say, well, I need to react to that. I think that's happening. I also think another reason for the increased prominence of the issue is the Paris Agreement itself. It's not a small thing when just about every nation in the entire world comes together and makes an historic agreement like this. It's a big deal. And the old cliche, the train is leaving the station, kind of applies. People who may not regularly pay that much attention to it say, oh, the whole world's moving in this direction. Yeah, I guess there's really a lot to this. We better go along.
And I mean, you must have a lot of personal, you know, very, very, very proud of it, because as the movie shows, I mean, you were in the backstage wheeling and dealing, making calls, trying to get India on board.
Yeah, well, I was doing my best, and so were lots of other people. It was a group effort, and a lot of people succeeded in getting an agreement that many thought was impossible.
A very powerful moment, you touched on it, is you taking that elevator ride up Trump Tower to meet the president-elect, which I believe was organized by his daughter, Ivanka Trump. Have you spoken to Ivanka since that meeting?
Oh yes, many times, but not since the speech in which President Trump pulled out of Paris.
And have you talked to President Trump at all since that
Not
meeting?
not since his decision on Paris. No.
You know, one thing you touched on when you left Trump Tower was that it was a conversation that would be continued.
Yeah.
You know, do you feel, did you need to continue that conversation
I
with
did
him?
continue. I did continue it,
Yeah.
and that was not the only conversation that I had with him. But after he made his decision on Paris, I have not reached out to him again. He has not reached out to me.
Do you feel it's an importance, though? Do you need to talk to him anymore?
Well, I would never close the door to responding, but I don't expect that and have no real desire to talk to him anymore. I think he made such an obviously reckless and indefensible decision. I think now my time and the time of others is better spent helping to move the country forward in spite of him.
What is your feeling of Trump as a president? I mean, give me a grade. You know, how's he doing?
Well, I never liked the question about letter grades, but I think that he's failing. I think that every day there's another set of tweets, another set of controversies, and it doesn't. Nothing seems to be getting done that's any good, and there seems to be a kind of a policy paralysis in Washington. Even the appointments that he's supposed to make as a new president, he's way behind all of his modern day predecessors, as I understand the statistics. So I focus most of all on climate.
Yes.
And so my opinion of his time as president is certainly influenced by my opinion of the job he's done on climate. He's tried to move the country in the wrong direction.
Believe it or not, we're going to ask some other questions other than Trump. Believe it or
Okay.
not. Give me your thoughts on, do you ever think about your own legacy? I mean, are you at a point in your life where you think about that at all?
No, not really. Maybe I should.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, you've done many things, many very important things. I mean, does that ever pop in your head at all, or things you want to be remembered for?
I don't really think about that. It's not about me. I have a sense of mission on this climate crisis, and I'm pouring all the energy I have into it. And I hope that I, along with others, can catalyze the emergence of real solutions to the climate crisis. I think we're making a lot of progress. I think we're going to win this, but it matters how quickly we win it.
Yes.
So I'm focused on that.
Give me kind of the next decade for you, goal-wise, with climate change. What needs to be accomplished in your eyes?
Well, every 5 years under the Paris Agreement, all the countries that signed up to it have an obligation to renew their plans and ratchet up their commitments, which is going to be easy to do because, again, the cost reductions for renewable energy continue downward in a very dramatic way. We're in the early stages of a sustainability revolution in the globe that has the scale of the Industrial Revolution but the speed of the digital revolution. And you see it with renewable energy. You see it in things like LED lighting, which take just a fraction of the energy for the existing bulbs. And within a few years, all new lights are going to be LEDs. They're electric vehicles. And I could go right down the list through sustainable agriculture and forestry. There are a lot of changes underway now. I'm excited by the prospect, and I look forward to working in the months and years to come to accelerate this transition.
Well, Mr. Vice President, we really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.